Hmm. Faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books worldwide. Hi there. This is Sally's Book Talk. Oh, today I'm interpreting the book Upheaval for you, subtitled Turning Points for Nations in Crisis. It's an era packed with risks and crises. For example, as individuals, we might face job loss or divorce, or the unexpected passing of loved ones. Nations can hit economic crises, social unrest, or even war. And globally, we've seen tough challenges like the COVID pandemic. In this crisis filled age, both folks and countries feel lost about the future. And this book explores how we humans can pull through when big crises strike. The author, Jared Diamond, is a world renowned evolutionary biologist, anthropologist, and thinker. And he's a dual member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Science. He excels at viewing things historically, blending humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences to tackle big issues like civilization's evolution. Oh, his most famous work, Guns, Germs, and Steel, won the 1998 Pulitzer Prize, and his other book, The Third Chimpanzee, got a UK Science Book Award. This upheaval we're discussing, he finished it at 82. In the book, Diamond draws from sociology, psychology, political science, economics, evolutionary biology, and more, examining how past nations made choices to understand human successes and failures in crisis response. Right after it was published, this book got attention from all corners of society, and Bill Gates said Diamond's smart, deep analysis boosted his confidence in humanity's crisis handling abilities and future prospects.
Yuval Harari, author of Sapiens, also thinks Upheaval offers strong guidance for tackling global crises.
To many people, a crisis seems like a total disaster. Stuff that shouldn't happen did. But Diamond sees a crisis as a critical moment, a turning point. It can sink a civilization, break a nation, end an era, yet it could be a chance for rebirth. Like Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Innovative, connecting Diamond's most groundbreaking idea in this book is breaking down the walls between psychology and political science, showing how nations handle crises much like individuals do. And so, how does an individual cope with a crisis? When someone's in a crisis, they find their usual ways of dealing with problems don't work. Facing such a big challenge, they start questioning their identity, values, and worldview. Psychological research shows that the first 6 weeks after a crisis hits are a key transition period. During this time, people either stick stubbornly to old paths that no longer work or start exploring new ways to cope. This new path could end up succeeding or failing. Once those 6 weeks are up, people either give up the failed attempt and go back to the old ways, or successfully resolve the crisis and regain happiness. Therapists, through long observation and practice, have discovered 12 factors that help individuals successfully navigate crises. The first one is facing the reality of being in a crisis. It's the starting point for crisis therapy. Second is bravely taking responsibility. Because we can't change other people, the only thing we have full control over is ourselves. Third is drawing boundaries, figuring out and defining what the urgent problem really is, examining which parts of ourselves don't need changing and which should be dropped or altered. Fourth is seeking material and emotional support from others. Most people who successfully get through a crisis realize how precious material and emotional support are. Fifth is learning from how others have handled crises. Sixth is self-strength. It means being an independent, confident individual who knows themselves and their goals and accepts who they truly are. Seventh is honest self-assessment, identifying your strengths and weaknesses. Eighth is experience from past personal crises. If someone has dealt with several different types of crises before, they'll be more confident in tackling new ones. Well, ninth is patience in facing crises. People rarely find the right solution right away. They might have to try many different approaches, and patience is crucial in this process. 10th is having a flexible personality. Being adaptable gives a big advantage over being rigid or inflexible. 11th is core values. It connects back to the sixth factor, self-strength. and refers to the moral principles and life views that are crucial to one's sense of identity. 12th and last is being unconstrained. It means the freedom to choose. If someone is weighed down by heavy burdens, it's harder to try new ways of solving a crisis. In Diamond's view, the 12 factors for individuals facing crises have strong parallels with how nations handle crises. Although we can't simply see nations as collections of individuals, there is indeed some connection between personal traits and national characteristics. Because a nation's culture is shared by its people, and a nation's decisions ultimately depend on its people's views, especially its leaders, who are deeply influenced by that culture. Thus, Diamond believes we can use personal crisis experiences to understand national crisis strategies. He adapted the 12 factors we just discussed to outline 12 factors affecting national crisis outcomes. Next, for easier explanation, we'll summarize these 12 factors into 4 main aspects. First is the prerequisite for tackling crises, facing them head on, acknowledging their existence and severity, and proactively taking responsibility. Second is the solution-finding process, making objective, honest assessments of internal and external conditions to find flexible, effective responses. Third is self-change, being ready for personal transformation, even radical shifts during crisis management.
Fourth is seeking external help, getting assistance from other nations or learning from their crisis experiences.
Now let's interpret upheaval through these 4 lenses. It's important to note, despite this book's theme being macro-level, it's not abstract. Quite the opposite, it's highly concrete and vivid. Diamond analyzes 7 nations' crisis experiences and lessons in detail.
These 7 countries are Finland, Japan, Chile, Indonesia, Germany, Australia, and the United States.
Why these 7? Because Diamond has lived in these countries and knows 6 of their languages. In other words, Diamond deliberately avoids claiming comprehensive global history logic, positioning himself as a limited observer and thinker. So, my interpretation will follow Diamond's approach, uncovering real crisis experiences through specific national cases and stories. Now let's discuss the first aspect, prerequisites for crisis response. A nation must first acknowledge the crisis's existence and severity, then proactively take responsibility. It's the first step for a nation to tackle a crisis. This sounds simple in theory, but it's tough in practice. Just like when someone hits a rough patch, they might instinctively feel unlucky and blame everyone else.
When a nation's in crisis, its people often fall into self-pity, seeing themselves as victims who want to pass blame, not take responsibility.
Diamond points out we must avoid this self-pity and dare to admit mistakes while taking ownership.
Because only then can real change happen. Speaking of nations that bravely took responsibility, Germany after WWO stands as a model. Actually, after losing W1, Germany's refusal to take responsibility helped the Nazis rise, leading to W1. How'd that happen? Well, as WWN's aggressor, defeated Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles with France, Britain, and America, redrawing its borders and limiting its military. Germany also had to pay reparations to the victors and surrender all its overseas territories. Germans widely complained the Versailles Treaty was unfair, but didn't reflect that starting the war was wrong. Many bought Nazi lies, that Germany lost because socialists stabbed them in the back, and that Jews drained their wealth, causing poverty. This victim mentality fueled the Nazis' rise, sparking World War II. Losing WWI left Germany in even worse shape than after W11. About 7 million Germans died in WW, with 10 million homeless. Germany's major cities lay in ruins from the fighting.
Its land was first divided into 4 Allied occupation zones, then split into 2 nations, West and East Germany.
Crucially, West Germany initially repeated post-WWN behavior. No self-reflection, avoiding responsibility. Though 22 top Nazis were tried at Nuremberg, many Germans then saw it as victors' justice, just winners punishing losers. Others felt the tried Nazis deserved it, but ordinary Germans were innocent, so Nazi investigations should stop there. Back then, nearly half of West Germany's government officials had been Nazi regime employees or collaborators, since only they had government experience. Yet, some individuals stepped forward to make Germans take historical responsibility. For example, a Jewish German lawyer named Bauer returned to West Germany in 1949 and dedicated himself to prosecuting Nazis, suing many low-level staff who'd worked at Auschwitz.
In court, Bauer repeatedly exposed those painful details, showing that in places like concentration camps, every participant was guilty.
Sadly, most of Bauer's cases failed. Nearly all defendants were acquitted. He even became a public target, with his safety threatened.
Yet through those trials, Bauer showed Germans their Nazi-era crimes. The turning point came in 1968, when protests swept the West, including West Germany. German students directed their strongest criticism at denouncing Nazism. The 1968 demonstrators were mostly born around 1945, politically clean, not raised as Nazis, while their parents, born 1905 to 1925, had often voted for Hitler. Now,
Young people naturally criticize their parents, and their parents' Nazi ties gave perfect grounds.
in 1968, a defining moment came when young Baeta shouted, "Nazi!" and slapped Chancellor Kiesinger in the face. Since this chancellor had been a Nazi, the movement pushed Germany toward liberalization, making Willy Brandt the first left-wing chancellor in 1969. Under Brandt, Germany began reckoning with its Nazi past. In 1970, during Brandt's visit to Warsaw, Poland, a historic moment unfolded. At Warsaw's Jewish Ghetto Memorial, Brandt knelt publicly, acknowledging Nazi crimes against millions, and begged forgiveness for Hitler's dictatorship and Germany's WHY actions. After Brandt knelt down, German society changed dramatically. Since the 1970s, understanding and reflecting on Nazi crimes has been required for all German citizens. So Germany moved past its defeatist mindset after WHY, owned up to its wrongs, and took charge. It didn't fall into the same traps as after W1 and built peaceful, honest ties with neighbors. For instance, West Germany hadn't set up ties with Eastern Bloc countries for ages. But Brandt launched a fresh, foreign approach, making deals with East Germany and connecting with Eastern European nations like Poland. You could say Brandt's kneel set the stage for Germany's reunification 2 decades on. Today, Germany lives in peace with old foes, leads the EU, and earns worldwide respect.
But Diamond notes that nations owning up to history like Germany are rare.
Japan's a prime example. It did terrible things to Asians.
Yet it hasn't fully owned up to those horrors. No Japanese leader has genuinely apologized like Brandt did for the suffering inflicted. Truth is, Japan's leaders just express regret or sorrow over its past aggression.
But Diamond says regret or grief is just feelings. Only saying sorry means owning the error.
In his book, he writes, "I really don't get why Japan won't admit the past, apologize properly, and move on." He also notes that Japan's stance fuels hate in China and Korea, posing a big risk and crisis for Japan. Now moving to the second part of how nations tackle crises, finding solutions. A nation needs to honestly evaluate itself and outside factors, then find smart, adaptable ways.
Finland excels at this. Finland's a Nordic nation with just 6 million folks famous for tech, education, and design, ranking among the wealthiest.
Before independence, Finland was ruled by Sweden for a long time, then became an autonomous Grand Duchy under Tsarist Russia, gaining independence in December 1917. However, from day one of independence, Finland faced a huge threat. Its northern neighbor, first the Soviet Union, now Russia. In October 1939, the Soviet Union made territorial demands on 4 Baltic states: Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Finland was the only one to say no to the Soviets.
Probably shocked them. How dare such a small country refuse me?
So, in late November 1939, the Soviets invaded with 4 well-equipped armies totaling 500,000 troops, while Finland mustered just 120,000 soldiers. No tanks, modern aircraft, or anti-tank rifles. Yet for independence, Finns fought heroically. When Soviet tanks advanced, Finnish soldiers split into ski teams crossing snowy mountains. Wearing white camouflage, they blended into forests, waiting until Soviet columns entered rifle range, then stopped, climbed trees, shot officers, and vanished. But Finns knew guerrilla tactics had limits. Against Soviet numbers and gear, they could only delay victory to buy time. Finland hoped for foreign aid. Some volunteers and weapons came, like Italy's near-useless old guns. But Sweden, Britain, and France, either fearing Soviet anger or stuck in World War II, sent no troops. Out of options, Finland turned to Germany. From June 1941, Finland fought alongside Nazi Germany. While Soviets battled Germans, Finns reclaimed Soviet-taken lands. Yet Finland never called itself a Nazi ally, just a co-belligerent. Finland also refused two Nazi demands, rounding up its Jews and joining the German advance on Leningrad. This helped Leningrad hold out during the siege, and by late 1941, Finland's Soviet fighting mostly stopped as the USSR battled Germans. Not until 1944, when Soviets pushed Germans back, could they deal with Finland. In June that year, Soviets launched a fierce assault. Finland both held the front and sent leaders to Moscow for peace talks. Why seek peace then? Simple. Finland couldn't fight anymore. In 5 years fighting Soviets, Finland lost nearly 100,000 people. With just 3.7 million citizens then, that'd be like China losing 37 million today. Crucially, Finland learned allies couldn't be trusted. Survival depended on itself alone. They knew only Soviet goodwill could bring security. The USSR demanded $300 million in reparations over 6 years. As an agricultural nation, this was crushing for Finland. But Finns accepted, even agreeing to bulk import Soviet goods. Finland complied, though Western goods were cheaper and better quality. Post-W1, Finland's core policy became earning Soviet trust. Presidents Paasikivi and Kekkonen, 1940s to 70s, stressed Finland's weakness and warned against expecting Western help. They insisted on understanding Soviet perspectives, though building trust was tough.
But Finland gave maximum effort and succeeded.
The USSR reduced reparations and extended payment deadlines. Of course the Soviets weren't being generous. Memories remained fresh of Finnish soldiers' fearless defense during the war. So as long as the other side approaches sincerely, the Soviets didn't want to solve everything with force. After that, Finland stayed genuine with the Soviets. Like in 1973, when negotiating with the EEC, President Kekkonen flew to Moscow to assure Brezhnev it wouldn't affect Finland's Soviet ties. So the Soviets turned a blind eye to it. Since Soviet leaders trusted Paasikivi and Kekkonen deeply, Finland didn't set term limits like most democracies would.
These two served 35 years combined, something Western nations couldn't grasp.
In 1979, the New York Times criticized Finland as pitifully submitting to a powerful neighbor, making shameful compromises on sovereignty. But Arthur Diamond sides with Finland. He notes Finland's long land border with the USSR was unchangeable. The core crisis was maintaining independence and prosperity under such tough constraints. As President Kekkonen wrote, Finland's foreign policy must balance survival, security, and geopolitical realities. No nation escapes historical necessity. Such a nation doesn't exist. Finland's crisis solution was built on honest self and external assessments. Plus, it learned from history. Allies didn't help against the USSR when needed. So Finland flexibly sacrificed some principles for political independence and prosperity, setting a crisis response example. All right, we've covered crisis prerequisites and solution finding. Now to the third aspect of national crisis response, self-change. Crisis means challenges, finding new ways for new situations, requiring self-adjustment. Often this change is partial and minor, not touching national identity or core values. National identity includes a country's language, culture, historical traits, and the shared values of its people. Oh, core values relate to national identity but aren't exactly the same thing.
For example, Shakespeare's literature is part of Britain's national identity, but during World War II's darkest hour, Britain refused to negotiate with Hitler, not cause of identity, but from a core value. We shall never surrender. It's key to point out that in crises, national identity and core values often help a country pull through.
Like Finland, we mentioned, it adjusted strategy from fighting the USSR to building relations with it.
But Finland's national identity and core values stayed unchanged. They'll fight for an independent Finland and adapt for that goal.
However, in extreme cases, a country's national identity and core values can undergo abrupt changes. That's what the book's title, Upheaval, signifies. In such situations, the country becomes totally different from its past self. Let's dive into Australia's story. Australia was a British colony till 1901, when Britain granted self-governance. Australia became an independent Commonwealth nation, but didn't cut ties with Britain. Instead, they saw Australia as an outpost of the British Empire in the Pacific, with strong pride in their Commonwealth identity. Australia's first constitution showed absolute loyalty to the British Crown, and its flag featured the British flag prominently. Because of this national identity, Australia upheld the White Australia core value, believing only white people should live there. So they implemented the White Australia policy on immigration. In 1901, the newly formed Australian federal government enacted the Immigration Restriction Act, barring blacks and Asians from immigrating. Their first Prime Minister, Barton, publicly declared that racial equality didn't exist. Non-white races couldn't be compared to whites. The former were inferior. Australians identified so strongly as British subjects that they'd fight Britain's wars, even unrelated ones, like in 1885, when New South Wales sent troops to Sudan to help Britain crush rebels. Oh, when WWN started in 1914, Australia immediately sent 400,000 troops to aid Britain. With under 5 million people then, Aussie and Kiwi soldiers formed the Anzac Corps, landing at Turkey's Gallipoli Peninsula and suffering massive casualties.
April 25th became Anzac Day, still Australia's most emotional national holiday, commemorating that battle.
This strong identity lasted into early World II. On September 3, 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany, Australia's PM announced it without consulting Parliament. So Australia prepared for war and sent troops to Europe. As Japanese threats grew, Australia considered recalling those troops. But Churchill promised Australians that Britain's fleet would protect them via Singapore. Those promises turned out to be empty. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked U.S., British, and Australian forces in the Pacific.
Just 3 days later, Japanese fire sank Britain's only 2 capital ships in the Far East.
On February 15, 1942, British commanders surrendered Singapore, sending 100,000 Commonwealth troops, including 2,000 Australians, into POW camps. Those POWs endured brutal treatment. Of 22,000 Australians captured by Japan in World War II, 36% died in captivity. Singapore's fall showed Australians that Britain couldn't protect them, and the Asian threat was at their doorstep. Australians painfully faced a basic truth. They were actually closer to Asia. You could say when British forces surrendered to Japan in the Far East, Australia hit a national identity turning point. Britain couldn't protect them. They had to find their own path. Even over a decade after 214, Australians still loved Britain so deeply they allowed atomic bomb tests on their soil. But global shifts don't bend to human will. In 1961, Britain applied to join the European Economic Community, shifting focus from Commonwealth to Europe. In 1967, Britain withdrew all military forces east of Suez, ending its protector role. UK-Australia trade dwindled, replaced by Japan as top partner. As Australians' British identity shifted, the White Australia core value changed too. In 1972, new PM Gough Whitlam officially ended the White Australia policy and abolished state-sanctioned racial discrimination. After that, Australia began accepting large numbers of Asian immigrants. By 1991, Asian immigrants made up over 50% of all immigrants to Australia.
Today, Australia remains a Commonwealth nation, recognising the British monarch as nominal head of state.
Yet it's transformed into an Asia-adjacent independent nation with its own interests and policies. Asia ties now exceed European ones. Asian faces are common on university campuses. City streets are lined with Japanese, Thai, Vietnamese, and Chinese restaurants. Australia abandoned old identity and values because it had to. Not every nation needs such upheaval. But Australia's story shows that when necessary, even massive change must happen. Now, to crisis response's fourth aspect, leveraging external forces, seeking help or learning from others' crisis experiences. Just as individuals in trouble crave help, so do nations. For example, in the early 1970s, Chile's economy kept shrinking, unemployment got worse, and inflation stayed sky high. In this situation, the Pinochet government in charge asked the U.S. for help, and the U.S. government brought back loan programs for Chile. Oh, famous economist Milton Friedman even flew to Chile in 1975, specifically for a 45-minute chat with Pinochet. And after that meeting, Pinochet handed over full control of Chile's economy to Friedman's students.
Those American experts' economic reforms worked right away. Chile's inflation dropped from 600% to just 9%. The economy grew 10% a year on average. Foreign investment boomed. Domestic spending went up. Exports rose, and things diversified.
In Diamond's view, today's U.S. is a classic case of not wanting to learn from others' experiences. Even though the U.S. is still the world's top power, it's sunk into some serious crises. By the way, Upheaval came out in the U.S. in 2019. Diamond wrote it before seeing how the U.S. handled the 2020 COVID pandemic. From that angle, this book's take on U.S. problems and crises is super prophetic.
Diamond thinks the U.S.'s biggest crisis now is political compromise falling apart fast.
The U.S. runs on a democratic system with separation of powers. Those three powers are legislative by Congress, executive by the president, and judicial by the Supreme Court. Compromise among these three has been key to U.S. democracy working smoothly for ages. Political compromise in the U.S. used to work. For instance, in the 1980s, Republican President Reagan and House Speaker O'Neill, even with disagreements, they still compromised and worked together well. They passed most laws, but from the 1990s on, especially after 2005, U.S. political compromise got way worse.
In 2008, right after Obama got elected, Republican leaders said they'd oppose all his ideas, and they meant it. Over the next 4 years, they blocked 79 of Obama's nominees for government jobs. That's more than in the whole 220 years before.
Oh, the situation's clearly gotten worse today. President Trump and Speaker Pelosi don't just fail to cooperate, they're outright hostile, constantly trading insults. Meanwhile, voters are getting more extreme ideologically, too. Author Diamond has a Democratic friend.
He says if anyone posts pro-Republican views on social media, he unfriends them, even his own aunts and uncles.
Another major U.S. crisis is worsening economic inequality.
The top 1% share of national income rose from under 10% in the 1970s to over 25% now.
The three richest Americans, Bezos, Buffett, and Gates, have combined wealth equal to the bottom 50% of Americans. Plus, U.S. investment in education and infrastructure keeps dropping. Ordinary Americans' education and science literacy are worrying despite U.S. tech leadership. Most Americans lack rigorous skills training, but Diamond says the scariest part isn't the crises. It's America's lack of crisis response awareness. Some deny the crisis exists. Others admit it, but blame foreign nations or groups, especially China, Mexico, and immigrants, instead of taking responsibility. Many wealthy Americans see the problems but buy escape routes instead of solving them, like buying property in New Zealand or converting old missile silos into luxury bunkers. Worse, Americans refuse to learn from other countries' crisis solutions. Americans insist they're exceptional, that no other nation's methods could work for them. For example, Canada's social or political approaches differ greatly. Their healthcare and immigration policies are more detailed and rational than America's. Oh, Americans know little about Canada, and certainly don't realize how much they could learn from them. Take Europe. Many countries there use policy support to fund healthcare, public transit, education, elder care, and the arts. This gives their citizens longer lifespans, higher science literacy, and greater happiness than Americans.
Yet Americans scoff at those policies. If they treat Canada and Europe like this, imagine their attitude toward other nations.
Diamond points out that despite America's huge advantages, it's squandering them at an accelerating pace.
If it keeps this arrogant mindset, refusing to learn from other nations' crisis solutions,
Its current advantages will soon be swallowed by massive crises. In fact, reading about America here reveals Diamond's true motive for writing Upheaval. Using other nations' cases, he critiques U.S. issues to convince Americans to face crises and seek practical solutions. In this sense, while Upheaval isn't strictly a history book, it carries serious orthodox historical weight. Having said that, we've covered Upheaval main content. Nations differ, and so do crises. Climate and energy issues, global inequality, and new disease outbreaks will all plunge us into crises. End quote. Quote, we must find ways to navigate through dangers. The core point is, only by preparing for upheaval can we find opportunity in danger. As Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. All right, Upheaval. That concludes our interpretation of this book. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.